sir. The glass shattered against the marble floor before Isabella even realized she had dropped it. The sharp crack echoed through the silent penthouse like a gunshot. Dominic Russo didn't flinch. He stood across the room, tall and still, his dark eyes fixed on her with a calm that felt more dangerous than anger. The city lights of Manhattan glowed behind him through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, painting his silhouette in gold and shadow. Isabella's chest rose and fell quickly. "Say that, sir." "Again," Dominic said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, almost gentle, but she knew Dominic Russo well enough to understand what that tone meant. It meant he was holding something inside, something heavy. Her fingers trembled. Wait," she whispered. The word stuck in her throat. 7 years. 7 years with this man, and she had never once been afraid to speak to him, until now. Dominic slowly walked toward the bar, each step deliberate. At 46, he carried the kind of presence that, sir, silenced rooms without effort, broad shoulders, sharp jaw, a faint scar near his temple from a life that had never been simple. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. The ice clinked softly. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. Isabella felt like the entire city had gone quiet just to hear what she was about to say. "I slept with someone," she finally whispered. The words hung in the air. Dominic lifted the glass to his lips and took a slow sip. He didn't shout. He didn't throw, sir, anything. He simply looked at her, and somehow that hurt more. "Boo?" he asked. One word, but it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Isabella closed her eyes. "Ethan." For the first time that night, Dominic stopped moving. The silence stretched so long that Isabella felt dizzy. Ethan Clarke, Dominic's financial advisor. The man who handled millions of dollars flowing through Dominic's legitimate businesses. A man who had shared dinner with them. A man who had laughed at Dominic's table. "Sir." Dominic set the whiskey glass down. His fingers rested against the marble counter. Then he spoke. "Ethan Clarke." Not a question, just confirmation. Isabella nodded weakly. "It only happened once," she rushed out. "I swear, it didn't mean anything." Dominic turned his head slightly, studying her like he was trying to understand a language he had never heard before. "Once," he repeated. "Yes." She stepped closer. "I was angry. We had that fight, remember? The night of the charity gala." Dominic, sir, remembered. Of course he did. 2 weeks earlier, Isabella had spent months organizing a charity art auction in Brooklyn. It meant everything to her. Dominic had promised he would be there, but that afternoon, a problem at the docks had turned into something bigger, a shipment dispute, one that could have started a war with another organization. By the time Dominic solved it, the gala was over. When he got home, Isabella had already gone out. He hadn't thought much of it. Now he understood. "Sir," continued speaking, her voice shaking. "Ethan was there. We talked. I had a few drinks. I was upset," and Dominic raised his hand slightly. She stopped immediately. The room fell silent again. Dominic stared at the rain sliding down the glass windows. For 25 years he had lived inside a world where betrayal was expected. Rivals betrayed you. Business partners betrayed you. Even family sometimes betrayed you. But Isabella, she had always been the one place that felt safe. 7 years, sir. Earlier, Dominic met her in a small Manhattan art gallery. She was standing on a ladder, arguing with the gallery owner about lighting placement for her paintings. "You're ruining the colors," she had snapped at the man. Dominic remembered smiling to himself. Nobody spoke like that around him. Later that evening, she accidentally spilled wine on his jacket. She apologized 5 times before he laughed and told her it was fine. She had no idea who he was back then, and when she eventually learned, sir, the truth, she didn't run. That mattered to him, more than she probably ever understood. Now Dominic turned slowly. His eyes met hers again. "Did he touch you in this apartment?" he asked. The question made Isabella freeze. "No." Dominic nodded slightly. "Good." She wiped her face quickly. "Dominic, Please listen to me. It was stupid. I regret it more than anything. Dominic walked closer, not aggressively, just slowly. Why Ethan? He asked. She hesitated. I don't know. Dominic's eyes, sir, narrowed slightly. You don't know? I was lonely, she admitted quietly. That word hit harder than anything else. Lonely. Dominic looked down at the floor for a moment. He had given Isabella everything money could buy: a penthouse, travel, security, freedom to pursue her art. But time was the one thing his life rarely allowed. When he looked back up, his expression was unreadable. Lonely enough to sleep with the man who handles my accounts. Isabella's voice cracked. I didn't think, sir, about it like that. That's the problem, Dominic said calmly. You didn't think. Her shoulders shook. I know. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows. Dominic walked past her and sat down in one of the leather chairs near the window. He leaned back, studying her. Not like a lover, like a man evaluating a situation. After a long silence, Isabella whispered something that made his chest tighten. Are you going to kill him? Dominic raised an eyebrow. That's what you think, sir. Of me? Her eyes filled with tears again. I know the world you live in. Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a different question. Does he think I know? No, she said quickly. Dominic nodded slowly. That meant Ethan was still going about his day like nothing had happened, shaking hands, moving money, smiling. Dominic leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You know what hurts the most? He said quietly. Isabella shook her head. It's not that you betrayed me, sir, blinked in surprise. It's that you chose someone weak. Her brow furrowed. Ethan? Dominic nodded. Men like him survive by attaching themselves to power. They admire it, they envy it, and sometimes they try to steal from it. Isabella frowned. What do you mean? Dominic didn't answer. Instead, he stood up again and picked up his phone. Her heart started racing. Dominic, he scrolled through his contacts. I need to meet Ethan tomorrow, he said calmly. Fear gripped her chest. Please don't, sir. Hurt him. Dominic looked at her. The look in his eyes was impossible to read. I haven't decided what to do yet. That answer scared her even more. She stepped closer. What about us? The question hung in the air. Dominic studied her face. The woman he had loved for 7 years. The woman who knew his quiet side. His tired side. The part of him the world never saw. I don't know, he said honestly. Her eyes broke again. Dominic, he walked toward the door. Go home tonight, he said. What, sir? To your apartment. Stay there. She looked stunned. You don't want me here? Dominic paused. For a brief second, the pain behind his calm expression surfaced. I need to think. He opened the door. Isabella stood frozen in the middle of the penthouse. As he stepped out into the hallway, Dominic made one silent decision. Tomorrow he would meet Ethan Clarke, and by the end of that meeting, Dominic Russo would know exactly what kind of man Ethan truly was. What he didn't realize yet was that, sir, Ethan had already been hiding a secret far more dangerous than an affair. A secret that would turn this betrayal into something far bigger than broken trust, something that could destroy everything Dominic had built. Morning arrived gray and heavy over Manhattan. Dominic Russo had already been awake for 3 hours. Sleep had come in short fragments, broken by memories he hadn't asked for. Isabella laughing on the balcony in summer. The first painting she ever hung in his penthouse. The way she tortured her. Used to steal his jacket when the nights got cold. 7 years. Now every memory carried a small fracture through it. Dominic stood in his private office overlooking the Hudson River, adjusting the cuff of his watch. The office was quiet, except for the low hum of the city waking up below. Across the room, Luca Moretti leaned against the wall with a coffee in hand. You look like you didn't sleep, Luca said. Dominic didn't answer right away. At 50, Luca had been with Dominic longer than anyone else. Loyal, sharp, and blunt when he needed to be. Finally, Dominic spoke. Pull everything we have on Ethan Clarke. Luca raised an eyebrow. You think the guy who stole your girl is worth that kind of attention? Dominic's voice stayed calm. I don't think he's that simple. Luca watched him carefully. Isabella told you something else? Dominic shook his head. No, but something about this feels wrong. Luca sighed and set his coffee down. He'll call Carlos. We'll dig. Dominic nodded. Sir. Once. Luca pulled out his phone and stepped outside the office. Dominic turned back toward the window. The truth was, the betrayal itself wasn't what kept him awake. Dominic had spent his entire life surrounded by betrayal. It came with power. What bothered him was Ethan. Men like Ethan Clarke rarely made reckless moves without a reason. And sleeping with the girlfriend of one of the most powerful men in the city, that was reckless, unless he thought he had something protecting him. Dominic's, sir. Phone buzzed on his desk. A message from Isabella. Please talk to me. He stared at the words for a moment, then set the phone face down without replying. Down in Midtown, Ethan Clarke stepped into his office building feeling strangely confident. He had expected chaos by now. Dominic Russo was not known for patience when it came to betrayal. Yet nothing had happened. No threats, no phone calls, no men waiting outside his apartment, which meant one thing. Isabella hadn't told him. Ethan smiled, sir, faintly as he stepped into the elevator. Luck had always been his greatest talent. He had built his entire career by attaching himself to powerful people. Hedge funds, wealthy investors, corporate executives. But Dominic Russo was the biggest opportunity of his life. Millions moved through Dominic's legal businesses every month. Construction companies, import firms. Hiao Estate. And Ethan controlled the books. For 2 years now, he had been quietly skimming small amounts, never enough to raise her. Alarms. Just pieces, tiny slices of an enormous pie. Now those slices sat safely in offshore accounts in Switzerland. Nearly $12 million. His plan was simple. 1 more year, then disappear. But Isabella, that had been a mistake, a pleasant one, but still a mistake. As he reached his office, his assistant greeted him. Morning, Mr. Clarke. Morning, Sarah. He stepped into his glass-walled office and loosened his tie. Then his phone rang. The number made his stomach tighten. Dominic, sir. Russo. For a moment, Ethan considered ignoring it, but that would only make things worse. He answered, Good morning, Dominic. Dominic's voice came calm and smooth. Ethan. Ethan forced a friendly tone. What can I do for you? There was a short pause. I'd like to meet. Ethan's pulse quickened. Everything okay? Just a conversation. About my girlfriend. The words hit like ice. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face, so she told him. He swallowed. How much do you know? Dominic's voice, sir, remained perfectly even. Enough. Silence filled the line. Ethan's mind started racing through possibilities. Lie? Deny? Apologize? Before he could decide, Dominic spoke again. Relax. That single word made Ethan more nervous than anything else. I'm not angry, Dominic continued. Now Ethan was confused. You're not? No? Dominic's tone sounded almost thoughtful. In fact, I'd like to thank you. Ethan blinked. Thank me? Yes. For revealing something important. A cold feeling crept up Ethan's spine. And what's that? He asked carefully. That loyalty, Dominic said quietly, is rarer than money. The sentence lingered in the silence. Then Dominic added, Meet me at the harbor at noon. The call ended. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. Something about that conversation felt wrong. Dominic Russo was not a man who casually thanked people for sleeping with his girlfriend. Across the city, Luca Moretti walked quickly into Dominic's office. We've got a problem. Dominic turned, from the window. What kind of problem? Luca tossed a thin folder onto the desk. Carlos Vega stepped in behind him. You were right, Carlos said. Dominic opened the folder. Inside were printed financial reports, highlighted transactions, offshore account numbers. Dominic's eyes moved slowly down the pages. How much? He asked. Luca crossed his arms. Just under 12 million. Dominic didn't react immediately, but his jaw tightened slightly. Over how long? 2 years. Dominic leaned back, in his chair. So the affair might not be the real betrayal, Luca finished. Carlos nodded. He's been robbing you quietly. Dominic closed the folder. For the first time that morning, anger flickered behind his eyes. Not explosive anger, cold anger, the kind that calculated consequences. He thinks I don't know, Dominic said. Luca smirked slightly. That makes him stupid. Dominic stood up, or desperate. Carlos frowned. You still meeting him? Dominic adjusted his coat. Yes, and after that? Dominic looked toward the harbor through the distant skyline. After that, he said quietly, I decide what kind of lesson Ethan Clarke deserves. Luca tilted his head. And Isabella? Dominic didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the door. 7 years of memories pressed against the back of his mind. Her smile, her voice, her loyalty until it broke. Finally, he spoke, one problem at a time. The harbor wind was cold at noon. Dark waves slapped against the wooden docks as gulls circled overhead. Dominic Russo stood at the end of the pier, hands in his coat pockets. Luca and Carlos waited several yards behind him. A black sedan pulled up near the dock. Ethan Clarke stepped out. He adjusted his tie and walked forward slowly, trying to appear confident. But Dominic could see the tension in his shoulders from a distance. Good. Ethan stopped a few feet away. Dominic turned. Ethan. For a moment, neither man spoke. The water churned below them. Then Dominic, said calmly, beautiful place to have an honest conversation. Ethan forced a small smile. About Isabella? Dominic's eyes held his. About everything. What Ethan didn't know yet was that Dominic already understood the full truth. The affair, the stolen money, the lies, and before the sunset that evening, Ethan Clarke would learn exactly what it meant to betray Dominic Russo. Not through rage, not through violence, but through a lesson far more terrifying. The kind of lesson that follows a man. For the rest of his life, the wind coming off the harbor was sharp enough to sting. Ethan Clarke felt it cut through his coat as he walked down the wooden dock toward Dominic Russo. Each step sounded louder than it should, the creaking boards echoing under his shoes like they were announcing his arrival. Dominic stood at the far end of the pier, facing the water, still, calm, like a statue carved out of patience. 2 men stood behind him at a distance, Luca Moretti and Carlos Vega. Ethan, recognized them instantly. Everyone in Dominic's circle did. Loyal men, dangerous men. Ethan forced himself to keep walking. When he reached Dominic, he stopped a few feet away. Dominic, he said. Dominic turned slowly. Ethan. His voice carried no emotion. That scared Ethan more than anger would have. For a moment, neither man spoke. The gray water churned below them, slapping against the wood pilings. Finally, Dominic gestured toward the railing. Walk with me. Ethan nodded and followed. The pier stretched out over the cold harbor, empty except for the 4 men. Dominic rested his hands lightly on the railing and looked out toward the skyline. You've been handling my finances for 7 years, he said calmly. Ethan nodded quickly. That's right. You're good at what you do. Thank you. Dominic tilted his head slightly, which is why I'm curious. Ethan's stomach tightened. About what? Dominic finally looked at him. Why a smart man would make such a stupid decision. Ethan, forced a nervous smile. If you mean Isabella, I do. Ethan swallowed. I already said I'm sorry. Dominic studied him carefully. Are you? Yes? Dominic nodded once. Good. The calmness of the conversation felt unnatural. Ethan expected threats, anger, but Dominic sounded almost thoughtful. I've spent my entire life around betrayal, Dominic said quietly. Ethan stayed silent. Business partners, rivals, even family. Dominic tapped the railing lightly with his finger. But betrayal, usually has a reason. He turned his gaze back to Ethan. Money. Ethan froze. Dominic reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded stack of papers. He handed them to Ethan. Luke, Ethan hesitated. Then he opened them. His heart stopped. Bank transfers, account numbers, highlighted transactions. Every single one traced back to the offshore accounts he thought were invisible. His hands began to shake. How did you get this? He whispered. Dominic watched him. That's not the sir. Important question. Ethan felt sweat forming at the back of his neck. Dominic, I can explain. Dominic raised a hand. Please do. Ethan's mind scrambled for a story. It's temporary transfers, he said quickly. Investment movement. I was reorganizing assets. Dominic's expression didn't change. Stop. Ethan fell silent. Dominic took the papers back slowly. $12 million. The number hung in the cold air. Ethan felt the weight of it. I was going to return it, he blurted. Dominic, sir, actually smiled slightly. That made Ethan's stomach twist. That's interesting. I mean it. Dominic leaned closer. Veen. Ethan had no answer. Dominic nodded slowly. Exactly. The harbor wind grew stronger, pushing waves harder against the pier. For a long moment, Dominic simply looked at him. Then he asked quietly, Was Isabella part of the plan? Ethan's eyes widened. No. Dominic studied his face carefully. He believed him. That wasn't part of the scheme. Just reckless stupidity. Dominic, sir, sighed. You know what your biggest mistake was, Ethan? Ethan waited. You underestimated how closely I watched the people around me. Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. I can fix this, he said quickly. Dominic raised an eyebrow. How? I'll return every dollar. Dominic stayed silent. I'll leave the country, Ethan continued desperately. You'll never see me again. Dominic looked out across the harbor again. The skyline shimmered faintly through the cloudy sky. I believe you, he said, sir, calmly. Ethan blinked. You do? Yes? Relief started to spread through Ethan's chest. Then Dominic added something that made his blood run cold. But that doesn't erase what you did. The words carried weight. Heavy, final weight. Ethan took a step back. What are you going to do? Dominic didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to Luca. Did the transfer clear? Luca checked his phone. Just now. Dominic nodded. Ethan looked confused. What transfer? Carlos smirked slightly. The one, sir, where you returned every dollar. Ethan's stomach dropped. You, Dominic, finished the sentence for him. Moved the money yourself? Ethan stared at him. Dominic's voice remained calm. You'd be surprised how cooperative banks become when the right people start asking questions. Ethan's entire escape plan had just collapsed. The offshore accounts were empty, gone. Every dollar back where it started. His chest tightened. You ruined me, he whispered. Dominic looked at him almost curiously. Sir, no. Then he said the sentence Ethan would never forget. You ruined yourself. Silence filled the dock. Finally, Ethan asked the question he had been dreading since he arrived. So what happens now? Dominic studied him. The fear in his eyes. The arrogance that had vanished. The man who thought he was clever now looked small. Very small. Dominic walked closer. Close enough that Ethan could see the faint scar near his temple. I could destroy you, Dominic said quietly. Ethan believed that, sir. Completely. With one phone call, Dominic continued, your career disappears, your reputation disappears, your life becomes very difficult. Ethan's breathing became shallow. Please. Dominic watched him for another long moment. Then something unexpected happened. He stepped back. You're going to leave New York. Ethan blinked. What? Today. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. That's it? Dominic nodded. You'll find another city, another job. Ethan didn't understand. You're letting me, sir, go? Dominic's eyes hardened slightly. No, the word carried quiet authority. I'm letting you live with what you did. Ethan frowned. I don't understand. Dominic leaned slightly closer. You're going to spend the rest of your life wondering when I might decide I changed my mind. The realization hit Ethan slowly. Fear, permanent fear. Dominic straightened his coat. Now go. Ethan didn't argue. He turned and walked quickly down the dock toward his car. When the sedan disappeared into the distance, Luca stepped forward. You really letting him walk? Dominic kept watching the water. Yes. Carlos shook his head slightly. That man robbed you and slept with Isabella. Dominic nodded. I know. Luca studied him. Then why spare him? Dominic's voice was calm, because fear lasts longer than punishment. Behind his calm expression, however, another storm was brewing, because Ethan Clarke had only been half the betrayal. The other half was the woman Dominic Russo still loved. Now he had to decide whether Isabella Marino had destroyed the one thing he had never doubted, her loyalty, and that decision would be far more difficult than dealing with Ethan. Dominic Russo sat alone in the dark penthouse, the city lights flickering through the rain-streaked windows like distant stars. The room felt different tonight, quieter. He had just watched Ethan Clarke's car disappear into the gray afternoon hours earlier. The man was already on a flight out of New York by now, probably staring nervously over his shoulder every few minutes. $12 million returned, a career destroyed, and a lifetime of fear waiting ahead of him. For Dominic, the problem with Ethan was finished, but the real storm still waited inside the room. Isabella. She stood near the window now, arms wrapped around herself, her reflection faint in the glass. She had arrived an hour earlier after Dominic finally called her. Neither of them had spoken much since. The silence between them was heavier than any argument. Finally, Isabella turned toward him. What happened with Ethan? Dominic didn't look up from the glass of whiskey resting in his hand. He left the city. Her breath caught. That's all? Yes. Relief flickered across her face, but it didn't stay long. The guilt behind it was stronger. She stepped closer. You didn't hurt him? Dominic looked up slowly. No. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. I'm glad. Dominic studied her face carefully. That simple sentence said more, than she probably realized. You're glad, he repeated. She frowned slightly. I didn't want anyone getting hurt because of my mistake. Dominic nodded once. Mistake. The word echoed in the room again. 7 years reduced to one word. Isabella's voice softened. Dominic, please don't do this. Do what? Talk to me like I'm a stranger. Dominic leaned back in the chair. I'm trying to figure out who you are right now. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. I'm the same person, sir, she said quietly. Are you? She walked closer until she stood only a few feet away. I made a terrible decision. That doesn't erase everything we've been through. Dominic's eyes searched her face. You didn't just betray me, Isabella. Her throat tightened. You betrayed the one place I thought was real. Tears formed in her eyes again. Everything between us was real. Dominic didn't answer. She sat down slowly on the couch across from him. You want to know the truth? She said. I already, know it. No, she whispered. You know what happened, but you don't know why. Dominic watched her carefully. Then tell me. Isabella took a shaky breath. I was lonely. Dominic's jaw tightened slightly. You said that already, but you didn't hear it. The words hung in the air. She continued softly. You live in a world where everyone needs something from you. Loyalty, fear, respect, money. Dominic said nothing, but when you came home, she continued. Sometimes it felt like you were, still in that world. Her voice cracked slightly. You'd sit in this chair, staring out the window, thinking about problems I couldn't see. Dominic looked down at the whiskey glass in his hand. She wasn't wrong. Being Dominic Russo meant never turning your mind off, never letting your guard down. Ethan talked to me, she said quietly. Dominic's eyes lifted again. He listened, she continued. He asked how I was doing. He asked about my art, about the gallery. Her hands tightened together. Sir, it was stupid. I know that, but for a moment, I felt like someone saw me. Dominic stood slowly, and that led you to his bed. The bluntness of the sentence cut through the room. Isabella closed her eyes. Yes, Dominic walked toward the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glowing under damp streetlights. After a long silence, Isabella asked the question that had been haunting her all day. Do you hate me? Dominic didn't answer immediately. He stared at the skyline, the life he had, built, the empire that required constant strength. Finally he spoke. No. The word surprised her. Then what do you feel? Dominic turned to face her. Tired. Her heart sank. Tired of fighting the world every day. He continued quietly. And realizing the one place I came to breathe wasn't safe either. Isabella's tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I never wanted to hurt you. Dominic believed that, and somehow that made it worse. Intentions don't change outcomes, he said. She stood, slowly. So what happens now? Dominic looked at the photos on the wall, pictures of them in Italy, in Miami, laughing on a beach in Greece, 7 years of memories staring back at him. He walked over to one frame and picked it up. It was from their second year together. Isabella was covered in paint, laughing while Dominic held her around the waist. For a moment, he remembered exactly how that day felt. Simple. Happy. Betrayal. He set the photo back down. You move out, he said quietly. The words, hit her like a physical blow. Her face went pale. Dominic, I bought the apartment across town for you years ago, he continued calmly. It's yours. Stay there. You're ending this? Dominic met her eyes. What we had ended the moment you chose someone else. Her breathing became uneven. I'll do anything to fix this. Dominic shook his head slowly. Some things can't be repaired. Silence filled the room again. Finally, she whispered something so quietly he almost didn't hear it. I still, love you. Dominic's chest tightened, but his voice stayed calm. I know. That somehow hurt her more than anger would have. She wiped her tears and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. Before she left, she turned back one final time. Dominic? Yes? If I had told you I was lonely, would you have listened? Dominic didn't answer, because the honest answer was, he didn't know. She nodded slowly, understanding his silence. Then she walked out of the penthouse. The door, closed behind her with a quiet click. Dominic stood alone again. For a long time, he didn't move. The city lights flickered across the empty room. And for the first time in many years, Dominic Russo felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Loss. But the story between Dominic and Isabella wasn't truly finished yet, because sometimes the biggest consequences of betrayal don't appear immediately. Sometimes they take time. And what Dominic Russo didn't know yet was that the choice he made, tonight, was about to change both of their lives in a way neither of them could possibly see coming. 3 months passed. New York moved forward the way it always did, fast, loud, and indifferent to the broken pieces people left behind. Dominic Russo stood at the same penthouse window where so many long nights had passed before. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, glowing beneath the early evening sky. But the room behind him felt different now. Quieter. Isabella's paintings were gone from the walls. Her books no longer filled the shelves. The lavender scent that once lingered in the air had disappeared. It had been his decision, and Dominic Russo was a man who lived with his decisions. Across the room, Luca Moretti leaned against the bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. You've been staring out that window a lot lately, Luca said. Dominic didn't turn. I've always stared out that window. Luca handed him the drink. Yeah, he said, but before you looked like a king watching his city. Dominic took the glass. And now? Luca shrugged. Now you look like a man wondering if the throne was worth it. Dominic let out a faint breath that almost resembled a laugh. Careful, Luca. That sounds like philosophy. Luca smirked. Comes with old age. They stood quietly for a moment. Then Luca spoke again. You heard about Ethan? Dominic raised an eyebrow. No. He tried getting a finance job in Chicago. Dominic took a sip of whiskey. And someone made a few calls. Dominic, looked at him. You? Luca shook his head. Not me. Carlos? Nope. Dominic frowned slightly. Then who? Luca shrugged again. No idea, but apparently the guy can't get hired anywhere. Dominic said nothing. Fear. Just like he predicted. Ethan Clarke would spend the rest of his life wondering when Dominic Russo might destroy him. Sometimes the shadow of power was worse than the power itself. Luca checked his watch. "I've got a meeting downtown." Dominic nodded. After Luca left, the penthouse fell silent again. Dominic finished his drink and set the glass down. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Carlos," he answered. "What is it?" Carlos sounded slightly surprised. "You might want to come down to the gallery on 42nd. Dominic frowned. What gallery? The one Isabella opened. Dominic hadn't spoken to her in months. What about it? Carlos paused. "You should probably see it yourself." Dominic didn't like vague answers, but something in Carlos's voice made him grab his coat. "Sir." 20 minutes later, Dominic stepped out of his car in front of a small art gallery lit by warm yellow lights. The sign above the door read, "Marino Gallery." Dominic stared at it for a moment. Isabella had always dreamed of opening her own place. Apparently she finally did it. Carlos stood near the entrance. "Inside," he said. Dominic walked in. The gallery was quiet. A few visitors moved slowly between the paintings. Dominic immediately recognized Isabella's style. Bold colors. Émotion paring, from every canvas. But then he saw something unexpected. One entire wall held a single collection. 6 paintings, each one different, yet connected. Dominic stepped closer. The first painting showed a man standing alone in a city of shadows. The second showed the same man watching someone walk away in the rain. The third showed him sitting alone in a large, empty room. Dominic felt his chest tighten. They were him, not literally, but emotionally. Each painting captured a piece of his life, his loneliness, his strength, his silence. Carlos spoke quietly beside him. "She painted these after you ended things." Dominic didn't respond. He kept looking. The final painting showed something different. The same man standing on a rooftop. But this time someone stood beside him, not touching, not speaking, just standing there. The space between them was small, but it was still there. Dominic stared at it for a long time. "Where is she?" he asked. Carlos nodded toward the back hallway. Dominic, walked slowly toward it. He found Isabella in a small office behind the gallery. She looked up when the door opened. Her eyes widened slightly. Dominic. For a moment, neither of them moved. 3 months of silence standing between them. "You came," she said quietly. Dominic glanced around the room. Paintbrushes, sketchbooks, the smell of oil paint. "You opened your gallery." She nodded. "It took everything I had." Dominic believed that. He looked back at her. "I saw the paintings." Her voice, softened. "I wasn't sure you ever would." Silence filled the room again. Finally Dominic spoke. "You painted me lonely." Isabella looked down slightly. "You were." He couldn't argue with that. After a moment she asked carefully, "Why are you here?" Dominic took a slow breath. "For 3 months I told myself I made the right decision." Her chest tightened. "And?" Dominic looked at her. "You betrayed me." "Yes. And trust isn't something I give twice." She nodded sadly. "I know." Dominic stepped closer. "But there's something else I've been thinking about." She waited. "You asked me a question that night." Her heart began beating faster. "If you had told me you were lonely, would I have listened?" He paused. "The truth is, I should have." Her eyes filled with tears again. Dominic continued quietly. "That doesn't erase what you did." "I know, but it means I wasn't perfect either." Isabella wiped her eyes. "Dominic, you don't have to carry my mistake too." Dominic looked around the small office, at the life she built on her own, then back at her. "Maybe not." He hesitated. "But 7 years isn't something I can pretend never happened." She didn't speak. She was afraid to hope. Dominic looked back toward the gallery where the final painting hung. "The last painting," he said. "The rooftop?" "Yes." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That space between them, it's there for a reason." Dominic nodded. "I noticed." Another quiet moment passed. Then Dominic said something. Neither of them expected. "Dinner." She blinked. "What?" "Dinner," he repeated. Her heart jumped. You mean? Dominic raised a hand gently. Don't misunderstand. She waited. This isn't forgiveness. The words were firm, but not cold. It's a conversation. Hope flickered in her eyes for the first time in months. A conversation, she repeated. Dominic nodded. Because sometimes, he glanced once more toward the painting outside. The distance between two people doesn't mean the story is over. Isabella gave a small, trembling smile. Okay. Dominic opened the office door. Come on. She followed him toward the gallery, toward the uncertain space between the past and whatever came next. And for the first time since everything fell apart, Dominic Russo felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. And sometimes, possibility is where every powerful story truly begins. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Cinematic. Mafia love for more powerful stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive.